So today we're going to talk about the layout for the brick and stone project, and then we're going to move into some of the information about lining, which we've already talked a little bit about, but we're going to talk about specifically for this project. So you're going to want to have your line drawing of the project. And when we look at this line drawing, we notice a couple of things right off the bat. The first is, if you notice the bricks, they are symmetrical. So there's the same partial brick on both ends. That's something that you really want to pay attention to. If you have something that's symmetrical, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be much better off if you start your layout from center and work your way out, as opposed to starting from one side and working your way across. You're just, this way, if you're off by a little bit, it'll at least still be symmetrical. So start from center, work your way out. The other thing you want to notice is that this top course, a course is just a fancy bricklayer term for a row. The first course of bricks is right at the top of the flat. There is no mortar line above it, so you know you're going to start your bricks with bricks as opposed to starting with mortar. And then the last thing we want to look at is just how many rows of bricks that we have, so that we can make sure once we have the layout done, we can go back, we can double check. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 11 rows. So make a note of that. Okay? And then I'm going to want to scale out the size of a brick and some mortar. And I'm not going to tell you what that size is, because I want you to figure that out. I will tell you that all of the full bricks are the same size, so you just have to measure one. And you can, once you know the size of a full brick and the size of the mortar line, you can figure out the rest of it from there, okay? So, when you start this layout, you're gonna probably, for this project, want to lay out the full mortar line. Once you get more experienced at this, you can really just lay out like a line and paint the width of the mortar. You just have to remember which side you're supposed to paint on. But I find that for beginning students, it's usually easier to draw out the full width of the mortar line. So to do that, what I like to do for something like this, where I've got a lot of repeating measurements, rather than measure, add, is I like to create what's called a story stick. So this is the stick part of it, and the story is the measurements of the bricks, okay? So, I take my tape measure, and I've written down the size of my bricks. And so I'm going to start, I want to start with my horizontal lines, because my horizontal lines go all the way across. So, start with my horizontal lines. This is way easier if you have a table or something to work on, but I'm trying to do this so you can see it. I'm going to measure, right, the height of the brick, and then a mortar line. And then another height of a brick, and a mortar line. Oops. I don't want that one. That one. And height of a brick and a mortar line. This will be a little more precise if you do this with pencil as opposed to with Sharpie, but again, I want you to be able to see it. So now I have brick, mortar, brick, mortar, brick, mortar. And I can take charcoal. And I do recommend doing this in charcoal. It's way easier to get rid of if you mess it up. You just do have to be a little bit careful about not getting your charcoal on too thick or too heavy, or so light that you can't see it. So. This is a bit of a big chunk of charcoal, but worth it. So I'm just going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to go brick, mortar, brick, mortar, brick, mortar. And then I can take my stick, I can move it down. I'm going to do that all the way down. little bit of paint down there just to make that up. And then I'm gonna come back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11. Great. I have the same number of courses of bricks that are on the elevation, so I have obviously done something right. Okay? I'm gonna continue to do this on the other side. And I'm just doing this with my stick turned upside down because it's easier for me to line things up. When you're doing this, make sure you make your marks in a way that you can still see them, right? So don't make such tiny little marks that you can't find them later. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw those lines in, and as soon as I have that done, I'll be back. Okay. So now I need to do my brick width, the length of the brick, the long way. And so I'm going to do the same kind of thing, but you'll notice on the elevation, right, every other row, we have alternating mortar lines, right, because that's the way bricks work. So what I want to do with my story stick is I'm going to start by laying out a full brick and then a mortar line and then a full brick and then a mortar line. But then I'm going to go back and I'm going to measure half of my full brick and I'm going to split the mortar line on that halfway point so that I have a mortar line So if this is half the distance for my brick, I want my mortar line to split that halfway point of the brick, okay? And then I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna actually end up in, so I've labeled this brick width so that I can remember the difference between this and the marks that I have for my brick height, right? Because they're not the same. But they're just close enough that I could potentially, if I wasn't paying attention, get confused. And we all know that I don't want to be confused. So now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do this. It's going to be a little hard, but I'll just try and talk you through. So I've already marked a center point at the top of my flat. I'm going to line up the center of one of those mortar lines with the center line of the flat. So I have a mortar line that is breaking center, that is splitting center. And then I'm gonna mark each of those brick and mortar widths. Okay? All the way out to the edge. So I actually have twice as many marks on this edge as I have bricks. Okay? Because you could do this so that you just mark the course of bricks on the top row that exists on the top row, but I like to do things fast. Now, one other thing that you should always do whenever you're doing layout like this is, like, once you've made your marks, go back and look at it. Does it make sense? Does this distance and this distance, do those two distances appear to be the same? Or at least close to the same, right? Because we do want this to be symmetrical. Now I'm going to do the same thing down here at the bottom. So I've already marked center. This one gets a little trickier because I don't have a nice edge to drop off of. But I can just line this up. So here again, here's my mortar line. I'm splitting that center line. So half of my mortar is on one side, half of it's on the other side. And then take my straight edge, and I want to make sure, look at my elevation. Okay, so I have little short shrimpy brick actually should be on the second row down. So my first course is going to start with this mark here, with this set of marks. I'm going to line those up. My sawhorse is leaving. Don't try and do this while it's standing up. I'm going to do my best. Right? So now every other course, right? So I'm drawing a line, skipping a row. Draw a line, skip a row. Draw a line, skip a row. Draw a line. Here again, once you've got this all done, step back, take a look at it, make sure you haven't, gotten too many rows here. Now I'm going to come back over here. This first one. It doesn't really matter where you start with this, right? But every other one. Oop, see, now I did it wrong. This is why we use charcoal. Get rid of it. Right? And now I have this, and I can just continue that on across the rest of the flat, and I'll have all of my bricks laid out. Okay, so I'll continue on with that, and then we'll lay out some stones. So for the layout on the stone, what you're going to want to do is take your elevation, your line drawing, and you're going to want to draw this grid on it, right? So I've drawn out a grid, and these are 6" to scale squares, right? So we know this is in 1" scale, and 1/2 of an inch is 1/2 an inch, right? And so if you don't have a scale ruler with you, you can just draw these as 1/2" squares, okay? We have 1/2" squares here on our flat, which you may or may not be able to see. I've drawn a corresponding 6" squares grid. Now you just want to make sure that, so you'll notice on here, right, this top row isn't full squares. It's fine. And you could start from here and measure down. You could, it's just, for me, it's easier to start from the bottom because then I know I've got a nice, even starting point. There's not really one of those up here unless I start with the bricks. But you could start from the top and work your way down as well. You just want to make sure that then your grid that's on your flat corresponds with that. So wherever your full square is on here, your first full square row is on here, it's at the bottom or the top, it needs to be the same on your flat, okay? Then I can just go through and I can start looking at places where lines intersect. So for this first stone down here, there's kind of it starts almost on that line, but not quite. So it just comes a little tiny bit above it, and then it's about 1/2 of that square, and then it crosses that line, and then it comes down, and then it's got a little tail thing on it. And then this one over here, kind of like that. And I'm also looking at the mortar lines and how wide they are, sort of in reference to the brick mortar lines. So they're approximately the same. They get wider in places, they get narrower in places, but I'm kind of going off of the same width of mortar lines overall that I have on my bricks. That way my mortar lines aren't going to get too terribly out of proportion. Because that's one place where I often find students have a little trouble on this. They make their mortar lines really, really wide, and they're really not. And so this little guy, corner of him comes down there, and there. I'm just sort of looking at where these points are, where they intersect, and I'm just then playing connect the dots between those. Try to keep kind of the same feel to these. You'll notice these stones are all kind of drawn with, mostly with straight lines, partially because I did this in AutoCAD. But they're not beany, curvy, organic stones. They're a little more hard, straight edges. So try to replicate that in your drawing. You want to try and get the same feel here that you have in the elevation. So that is how you're going to do the layout for the stone.